When I was 8 years old, I met my best friend for the first time. His name was Buddy, and from the moment we met, we were the best and fastest of friends. And for hours and hours, we would go out into the mountain forest that surrounded my childhood home, and we would conquer kingdoms and slay dragons and create grand imaginary domains. And I remember once we went up to this big rock outcropping that was in the middle of crazy old Helen's 1,000-acre ranch. And it was rumored that if Helen caught you trespassing on her property, she would shoot you with a sawed-off shotgun from her front porch. But it was worth the risk. And as Buddy and I made our way past her front porch, survived the shotgun, and got up to the top of that rock outcropping, I remember as we stood there together and looked out over miles and miles of earth and sky, we commanded the wind and the rain and the sky and the clouds, and it was epic. And something in my little boy heart gave itself over to Buddy, and I knew from that moment on that I had found a friend for life. Well, now, 35 years later, as a licensed professional counselor, I listen to people tell these kinds of stories from their life all the time, these important moments from their past that still have impact and importance to their life today. You see, the logo of Restoration is the cross-section of a tree. And inside the tree are all the rings of the tree that tell the stories and the seasons of the moments of that tree's life. And encoded into the stories are the experiences of that tree. Now, on the outside of the tree is the adult tree. But on the inside are all the seasons and all the ages that tree has ever been. The most important parts in learning how to read the rings of a tree are to learn how that tree has experienced trauma. And in a tree's life, there's two main kind of categories of trauma that the tree will experience in the wild. The first is what we have right now throughout many states in our country, especially here in Colorado. And that is the trauma of fire. And fire will come and it will blaze through the forest and it will burn the tree, and that trauma will get locked into the rings of that tree. Some external harm that has come and harmed that tree. Well, the other category of trauma in the wild for a tree is not something external, but something that I would call drought. And this is where something that is good has been withheld from the tree. Something the tree needs in order to live has been withheld. That also is a trauma, and it gets written into the rings of a tree. The crazy thing is that it's the same with people. That our stories get written into and encoded into our lives. And the most important ones, the most shaping ones, are usually marked by some level of trauma. Harm, pain. It's really quite interesting, actually. You know, when we experience trauma, especially in those younger years of our lives, that the trauma gets stored into our neurology. Our neurobiology actually responds and is formed in response to the experiences that we have, the traumatic experiences that we have as children. And so as with those rings of the tree, we also have moments of fire and we have moments of drought that get locked into our very inner core. And the impact of those stories continues to live with us throughout the rest of our lives. As those stories continue to show up in places in our lives, we live as if those are the ruling narratives. Those are the truest parts about us. And we get into what I would call a story rut, a place where the story digs deep and continues to perpetuate itself. So now, as I work with clients and they come to me with their stories, and they're dealing with issues in the time today, dealing with depression, anxiety, addictions, relationship struggles, whatever it might be, usually what's happening today has something to do with a story rut that was formed years ago through a traumatic experience as a child. A traumatic experience like fire, or a traumatic experience like drought. And that story rut forms in them, and they continue to live out of that space. And now today, they're struggling with some level of discomfort or challenge in their lives. Well, before I get too far ahead of myself, I have a confession to make. And this confession has to do with Buddy. You see, there's something about Buddy that you don't know, and I'm a little ashamed to tell you. And that is that Buddy, my best friend, was a horse. Yes, he was a horse. And before you start getting all judgy on me for having a horse as a best friend, you need to know a little bit more of the context of my life. You see, I was born into a family with one older sister, and when she was born with a mental and physical disability that even to this day prevents her from getting anywhere beyond a 1 or 2-year-old level of functioning. And my parents were devoted to her care. They were devoted to her care and wanted for her to succeed, but by the time I came into that family system, there wasn't as much care left over for me. The attention and care that I needed as a boy wasn't there as much as what I actually needed until Buddy came along. And so when Buddy came along, I attached to him, and I finally found a friend and someone to play with and adventure with and be with, and someone who would give me their undivided attention and affection. And so, of course, for years, Buddy was my trusty steed. And we would go and, like I said, conquer kingdoms innumerable until Buddy died. And you can imagine, for where I was as a boy, that was a significant story. For what I had experienced previously as drought had suddenly turned into fire. Now, he'd been sick for several days, and we didn't quite know what was going on for him. And so my dad finally invited the vet to come over and then sent me inside the house. And I remember running upstairs to the master bathroom, and above the bathtub was this high window. And I remember climbing into the bathtub and then climbing on top of the edge of the bathtub just to get high enough to see out the window to where Buddy was in the corral below. And as I watched the vet check him out and look at him, I could see that something was really, really painful inside of Buddy. And then I saw the moment that something ruptured inside him, and my best friend collapsed to the ground. I saw the vet walk over to him, inspect him a little bit more, and then slowly start to shake his head. And I remember when the vet looked up, made eye contact with my dad, and pronounced my best friend dead. As I stood there on the edge of that bathtub and looked out that window, it wasn't just something in Buddy that died. Something inside of me collapsed as well, because my best friend, the one that I had connected to, the one I had found favor with and affection with and attention with and adventure with, that part of me died with him as well. And I remember standing there feeling the pain of that loss, looking out that window, and I made a vow. I made a vow to never again give myself like that to another. I made a vow to never again become that close, because to come that close meant that death was lurking right around the corner. And I knew even then as a little boy that I could not sustain that kind of loss again. And so I shut my heart off. I raised the walls. I kept my distance. And in that moment, a story rut was formed. And the reality is that I lived like that for decades. And all the relationships that I had were walled off and kind and friendly and all that, but they were walled off and at a distance, and I never fully gave myself over to another like that. You see, the reality is that Buddy's death is not the worst thing that has ever happened to me in this life, not by far. But every loss that that little boy experienced since then has been through the lens of that experience. And every loss that I experienced as a little boy just deepened that rut and raised those walls even higher, convincing me that it was true that I was destined to live at a distance and behind a wall. until a few years ago, my wife gave me a picture. And this was a picture of a horse. This picture was given to me as a birthday present, and it was an invitation from her. And on the surface, you might say, oh, isn't that nice? She gave you a picture of a horse. And I would say, yes, it is really nice, but it's so much more than that. You see, not only did she know of Buddy's existence in my life, not only did she know about Buddy's passing and what that was for me, she also knew what it meant and what happened to me in the moment that Buddy died, and she knew that part of me died as well. And she'd also been bumping up against those walls in my life for years. And that gift of the picture of a horse was a kind invitation to ReStory my life, to come to a new place of imagining what might be possible. You see, restoring is coming alongside of someone through something that I call disruptive kindness. It is the kindness that recognizes that something, yes, has died and honors that which has died, and also still hopes for something to come alive again. It helps someone reimagine the spaces that have been ruts in their lives and allows them to come back into a place of life that they forgot was possible. And so in that moment of receiving that picture from my wife, she was inviting me to restore my life and literally saying, yes, that was hard. Yes, that was wrong. Yes, no boys should grow up living in that kind of emotional drought. And yes, the fire that you experienced in that moment is far too much for a little boy to bear. And yes, the raising of those walls and the distancing of your heart, that makes a lot of sense. And it might actually have been the best thing for you to do in that moment. And what might it be like for you to come alive again? What might it be like for you to reimagine? What might it be like for you to say, hey, maybe there's something else that you could live with, some other story that might actually be worth living? So now, as I work with clients, and they bring their depression and their anxiety and their addiction and their relationship struggles, we start there, we focus there, but very quickly we move from the present into the past. And more often than not, we find story ruts that have kept them stuck in a story that they never wanted to live. They never hoped to live, and they were not designed to live in. And those story ruts keep them stuck, and that's what's driving the addictions and the depression and the anxiety. And so to restore your life is not to find ways to manage your symptoms or change your behavior. To truly come alive is to step back into those places with that disruptive kindness and honor that which has died and reimagine what it might be to come alive again. And to give a different narrative, to reimagine a different narrative with and for that person, and that is what I am passionate about doing. So you'll be happy to know I now have human friends, and not just animals. And it is in relationship with those human friends and together with my wife that I've learned to lower those walls just a little bit more each year. And that the distance between me and others has shrunk a little bit more each year as I've learned to reimagine what it might look like for me to restore my life and live in relationship like I was designed to live. And so I'm wondering what it might look like for you to restore your life. What might it look like for you to live free and to come alive again? What little boy inside of you is peering out that bathroom window, erecting walls and creating distance? What little girl inside of you is living a story that she never wanted to have? Well, the next step for me is to take my human friends and to go back to crazy old Helen's ranch, sneak past her front porch, survive the sawed-off shotgun once again, climb up to that rock outcropping, and actually have adventures, conquer kingdoms, slay dragons, and play with the people that I was designed to play with. What is your ReStory? Thank you.